Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to my talk where I'm going to talk about creating a budget and schedule for your game. My name is Heather Chandler, and I am a game development expert from the Powell Group. A little bit about myself. I have been working in the industry in production for about 25 years. I started my career at Activision way back when as a production assistant. And then over the past many years, I worked my way up to being a senior producer on Fortnite. And now I am also working on several other titles, including Helldivers 2 and Threads of Time. I also am an author where I've written a couple books about game production and game localization. And I also am a consultant with the Powell Group where we help independent developers kind of, find publishers or help them get their projects on track or find teams or anything else that you might need to actually make a game. So today I am going to talk about the exciting world of project management. We're going to focus most specifically on creating a schedule and budget because, as many of you work on your games and you're thinking, hey, I actually want to turn this into something, you're going to have to pitch your game to a publisher and they're going to be interested in understanding how much money do you need to make the game and how long is it going to take you to finish it. So, this talk's going to kind of go through just some very basic, high level things that you'll want to keep in mind as you structure a schedule and budget for your game. And then you can use all of these things to create something that you can include in your pitch deck for publishers. I'd like to begin the talk just by discussing what is project management. Project management is a term that gets thrown around a lot, and you may not think, wow, why would I need project management on my game? I know exactly what I need to do. But I think it's important to kind of understand the mindset and the concept of what project management is. So basically, we have what's called like the project management triangle, or as you can see here, it's a Venn diagram. And the choices are you can have something good, you can have something fast, you can have something cheap. And the beauty of the project management sort of triangle is that really you can only service two of these items. So, for example, if you want to make something that's really good and make it quickly, it's probably going to be expensive because you're going to need to have a large team and you're going to need to have enough resources so that you can work at speed. If you want to make something good and keep costs down, it's probably going to take a long time to do. It could take many years to do because you'll have a smaller team, or in some cases, you hear stories of one person development groups that worked for 4 or 5 years or 6 years on a game before it was released. And then if you decide, hey, what the heck, I'm not even worried about making anything good, I'm just going to make it as fast as I can and as cheaply as I can, then you're probably going to have poor quality. But that still is an option. If you're okay with not making something good, then you probably can get something made fast and cheap. So when you think through sort of project management, this helps prioritize your strategy for shipping the game. You want to think about which of these things are the most important pillars for the project management of your project. Sometimes teams say, okay, I really want to make something good and fast. But then as time marches on and they get closer to a ship date, they may need to scope down as the release date approaches. So you want to focus on creating something that provides a core playable build that is a good experience, and then you can build on that. And project management is a good way where you can kind of build a core and then you can plan iterations and updates to that core as that gets you through to launch. The beauty of sort of this iterative method is that you always have a build that you can play. And at some point, the build will be in a position where you could say, this is good enough. If I had to ship it today, I could ship it today and then I could continue improving it. No Man's Sky is a great example of that. Pokemon Go, for you players out there, if you remember way back when that game got launched 5 or 6 years ago, it was a very different version of the game than you play today. So, next, we are going to discuss why project management is important. And project management and production kind of are used interchangeably. In my mind, I view project management more as that is a very specific focus on budgets, schedules, staffing plans. But production also encompasses what you're trying to do with your game. You're actually trying to create an interactive experience that players will enjoy. So, production means you take project management, and as you're thinking through sort of your budget, schedule, staffing needs, you understand from a quality standpoint what it is your players want. So that means that you are working directly with art, design, and engineering. You're working directly with your publisher, and you're not just having conversations about money and timelines, but you're having conversations about the quality of the experience, what the goals of the game are, what are the pillars, and how can you craft a production plan that encompasses all these different things. And it means you have to have inputs from the development team and from the publisher. So production is sort of that all encompassing thing. And the reason that production is important on your game is because it can help you in many ways. Number one, it helps you kind of scope what it is you want to do. So if you've not made a game before, there's so many different things that you need to work on and create and plan for, that when you start sitting down and listing out all of these things, you may find that the game you want to make could take 5 years. But if there's a version that you could make in a year, production can help you scope that because you'll be looking at sort of your scheduling and your budget, and it forces you to be very thoughtful about where you want to make cuts or reduce scope. Production also helps you identify all the different things that you're going to need. So it's not just about, do I have enough money, but you also have to hire people, and these people require salaries. You have to figure out what technology you want to use. Do you want to use the Unreal Engine? Do you want to use the Unity engine? You need to think about sort of the schedule for making the game, and do you have enough money to sustain the studio until your game launches? And so as you think through sort of your production plan and what's needed, it can help you identify all of these different things. It also is useful for defining what you can and can't do in a project. So you might say, okay, we um, are not able to use the Unreal Engine because right now the only people that we can find have experience with the Unity engine. And it's not to say that people can't know multiple engines, but in this example, you want to hire somebody quickly. So you're like, okay, so for this game, we're going to focus on Unity because we already have prior experience with that. Um, you might determine that you can't support the cost for full voiceover in a game. So production can kind of also help you figure out what's going to work and what might not work. Once you actually start making the game and you've kind of pulled your plan together, production is especially important during development because it helps you track against the progress you want to make. So you can start measuring how well are you progressing. Later on in the talk, I'll talk a little bit about a roadmap and a milestone schedule. And so from a production standpoint, you're going to be constantly comparing your progress against what you planned out in your milestones. And it's very important to be able to measure these things because it helps you determine how far um, off you are schedule wise. Is this game going to come out when you think it's going to be ready? Is it going to come out months later? Is it actually ready to come out earlier? So it's really important that you have a framework in place so you can constantly measure your progress. And the other thing I like to say is knowing. It is really important for you to know where things are with your project, what the plan is for the game, where you're starting, where you're going. And if you are working with a publisher or you're looking for one, the more you can show them that you've thought through the plan and you understand all the different pieces of, what it's going to take to make this game, they are going to feel more comfortable providing you with funding or support because they know that you already have an understanding of what your project needs are and you understand how to track and measure these things. All right, next slide. Let me get a sip real quick. All right, so we're going to start by talking about roadmaps and milestones. So I'm going to show some examples and I'll show those in a minute. Let's see here. Can we switch to the shared screen? Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what I call a milestone overview. I've kind of made this example template off of a fake game just so that I can kind of talk through the concepts. So, the content of what I've put in any of these things, if people are trying to read it, is not important, or as important, and it's not a specific game. It's just there as guidelines for the types of things you want to think about. So, a milestone overview is a way to kind of slice your project up into mini goals across the timeline. So, if you have a game and you're like, I'm going to finish this game in 2 years, you're going to divide that up into a set of mini goals that are called milestones. Um, Studios define milestones differently. For purposes of my spreadsheet, I kind of stuck with some very basic definitions of the concept milestone, a prototype, a first playable, an alpha, a beta, and then a launch. Within each of these milestones, you're going to have specific deliverables for each of your disciplines, including engineering, art, design, production, publishing, sound, localization, and whatnot. So, what you would do is in the concept phase, the overall goal of the concept phase is to define your game concept and scope out what the core elements are that you want to prototype and iterate on. So for a lot of you, you might, as part of the game jam experience, you're going to start out with this, like, what if? What if XYZ? What would that core loop look like? And then you're going to build a prototype. And so you're going to start by defining sort of broad strokes of what this concept looks like. You'll think about, from a design perspective, you'll probably think about gameplay ideas. You're going to think about character and settings. You might do some paper prototypes to test out ideas. You might start by creating some simple digital prototypes. The artist is going to start looking at visual references, building mood boards, and kind of trying to find the style. And then the engineering group is going to be looking at what types of engines they want to use, what's the architecture. So if this is going to be a multiplayer game, how are they going to do that? They're going to work with art and design to discuss the feasibility of different game ideas, features, and systems. And they will also be helping with some rapid prototyping as everyone kind of tries to brainstorm and hone in on sort of what they think the concept is going to be. So at the end of the concept milestone, you would have some sort of game concept document. You might have a very simple prototype, and then you have some sort of understanding of what additional work you want to do to bring it to a full-blown prototype. So the next milestone in this timeline would be a prototype. This is the phase where you're going to prove out your core concept and gameplay loop. You're going to add basic functionality. You'll have some basic UI in there. Art will have samples of character and environment art. They might have some placeholder UI in there. Design is going to have like a core game loop that feels really good and really gets across what the player would experience if they were to play the game. Production at this point is going to be creating a high-level roadmap with the milestones, and they'll start estimating sort of the budget and schedule. Publishing is going to be looking at sort of platforms, market position for your types of games. So they'll start doing sort of comparables and competitive analysis. And if you don't have a publisher, you probably would be doing this sort of comparable or competitive analysis yourself. And so during this prototype phase, the goal is to create a prototype that you can hand to somebody that's not necessarily a game developer or somebody on the team and say, can you play this game and give me your feedback? Is this gameplay fun? Do you have an understanding of what we're trying to do with the characters and settings and themes that we've chosen? Is this enticing to you? Can you see how we would develop this game, into a full game experience? And so many times when you go pitch to a publisher, they're going to want to see at least a playable prototype. And publishers are used to looking at works in progress. So you can give them something that, at least if the core gameplay is fun and it's got a couple pieces where it shows what the gameplay could be like at launch, that, those are very useful to show to publishers. And so at the end of the prototype phase, you have something you can hand off to somebody, and they can play it and provide feedback. Um, The next sort of iteration of this would be a first playable. Now, a first playable builds on your prototype. So, with the first playable, your goal is to create a longer game experience that really reflects the intended launch experience. So, this includes creating what is sometimes called a beautiful corner or a vertical slice, where you have final art in the game in a very small area that is representative of what type of art the game would ship with. Um, the gameplay experience would have some basic player progression systems so that if you were to play the game for 10 to 15 minutes, you would get a sense of progression in the game and how your character levels up, or how the game sort of, ramps up difficulty level, or how the game introduces new content or challenges. And so somebody who would play a first playable would say, oh, yeah, I can totally see where this game is going. I played the first level, it was beautiful. I felt that the character really learned and progressed. There were lots of fun things to do in the world. So even though it was only a 10 to 15-minute experience, I could definitely appreciate how this would translate into a larger game. And to kind of talk about, like, a question I get a lot is like, how long do each of these phases take? Concept, prototype, first playable. And the answer is it really depends. For somebody who is like an independent developer and you don't necessarily have a publisher that you're beholden to, you can determine how long it's going to take you to kind of make your concept and how much time you want to spend honing a prototype. You could spend 6 months on this, you could spend a year. And it might be limited by how much time you have to spend on this project. So I would say the concept and prototype phase for someone, an independent developer who doesn't have a publisher yet, is really dependent on how quickly you want to be in a position to pitch your game to somebody, and how quickly, how much of the work can you do yourself? How much work do you need to perhaps hire somebody in to come in and help you finish something out? So, for example, I've worked with smaller developers, and it might consist of an engineer and an artist. And between the two of them, they have enough skills to get a concept and a prototype up and running that would be good enough to show a publisher. Once you do get a publisher involved, though, they might have specific guidelines for how long they want you to spend on different types of milestones. So they might say, okay, we liked your prototype, we're going to sign you to a deal. The first milestone we want you to achieve is a first playable. And they might say, we want to target that for in 4 months, we want to see a first playable. And then, in 10 months, we want to see an alpha, and then in 6 months we want to see a beta. It really all kind of depends on the schedule that you guys have agreed on with them. It depends on the work that you do ahead of time, where you say, this is the schedule we've made out, and based on our understanding where we want to go, here's where we think we'll be at first playable, we'll be at alpha, we'll be at beta. So for a project that's in development for about 2 years, I would say sort of these first three phases could take anywhere from 6 to 9 months, and then the alpha and beta, alpha probably taking roughly 12 months, and then the beta taking the remainder of that time. Um, so the next one would be an alpha. Now, and for me, I think an alpha is one of the most critical milestones in the game development sort of milestone track, because at this point, once you have a completed alpha, you have a game that can be played from beginning to end, that has all the core systems in place, and it has all the content in at a placeholder level or above. So this means you can hand this game off to somebody and say, here is what the entire game experience will be like. You have your core UI in, your core progression systems in, the core game loop is working. You might have sort of first iteration of music. You will have art and animation in to some level. It might not all be polished, and some of the content could be placeholder, but you can really see and say, this is an actual game. It just needs now, the placeholder art needs to be replaced, it needs to be polished and refined, and we need to make a couple little adjustments in the game loop, and then we're ready to add the other content, like our side quests, like our other challenges and things like that. And if you can get a game to an alpha, and from there you can really sort of map out specifically what are the things we need to do to get it to a beta. Alpha is also where you're going to start, getting your sound effects in. You're going to start thinking, probably start localizing things. You're going to be um, doing some heavy testing starting with alpha. Up until then, testing wise, you will be, testing specific builds for specific feature functionality. But once you hit alpha, you're going to have a lot more testing on a regular basis because you're going to be constantly putting new things in the game, tweaking things, and making adjustments to it. The next key milestone after that is beta. And basically, a beta is this game is ready to ship minus any bugs that need to be addressed. My recommendation is, and there's different schools of thought on early access, so don't take my word, as like the only way to handle it. But most of the time, if you are thinking about doing an early access title, you probably want to have your game close to beta, which means the game is close to being launched. All the assets are final, all of the gameplay is in, all the systems are working, it is code complete, you're not adding any new features, it doesn't have any placeholder art. Um, you know, you have it's got a localization, thing placed. You've got your final VO recordings done and they're ready to be implemented. So at beta, you want to be able to say my game's done. All I need to go do now is kind of bug fix and polish it. I'm not adding anything more to the game. Um, then the launch, so there's a period between beta and launch where basically you're fixing bugs. That could be anywhere from 2 months to 6 months, depending on how much time you have at the end. I recommend at least having 2 months between beta and launch just because there's going to be a lot of stuff in there, a lot of little stuff that you're like, oh, this is an easy fix. We can polish this. This is going to make it better. We have this handful of bugs to fix. But once you've kind of done that and then the game is ready to launch. And at launch point, you're saying, hey, we don't, all of our high bugs have been sorted out, art's final, all of that. So that in a nutshell is sort of how you would do your milestone overview. Let's see here. So I want to talk through a little bit how you would think through your milestones. Again, this is just an exercise to kind of help figure out what it is you want to do. So you might start by saying, here is my core loop, and here's what we're going to do. And you could set up a spreadsheet like this where you say prototype, first playable, alpha, beta, and you start saying, these are sort of the key gameplay features that we're going to have. You could put your narrative stuff here. Again, these are just examples. And so for each one of these sort of key buckets, you might start defining, okay, what does a prototype look like for the dynamic quest system? What is first playable? What pieces do I need to have for these various things? You can see down here, I have sort of combat systems fleshed out. So at prototype, you say basic combat elements are there. First playable, you want to design and prototype ways to deepen and enhance the combat experience. At the alpha phase, the core combat is established and implemented. You can continue to polish it, and you can start creating additional content, combat content that maybe is an iteration on things you currently have in there. And then in the beta phase, like combat's finished and you're bug fixing. So as you look through each of your big buckets of work, you can start defining sort of where it would need to be at these various milestones that you've defined. We have things here for front end UI. Like that's a big piece of work that you may not realize how much time it takes to make UI. So for this breakdown, we would say, in the prototype, we have a placeholder UI. It's not polished. It is very bare bones. It's a gray box implementation, meaning it doesn't look pretty. It is simply functional, and you have kind of basic wireframes. During your first playable, you're going to iterate sort of on the UI experience. You're going to map out sort of the more detailed flows. You might do some art style and prototype and playtest key areas of the AI, of the UI. At alpha, you would have the full UI flow needed. You would have it implemented in the game. And you would be creating sort of the UI pieces and widgets and all of that stuff. So I think with this way of thinking, that's how you want to start breaking your game down as you plan out sort of what your various milestones are. Let's see here. All right. So the next thing you want to think about is sort of the roadmap overview. Um, and the benefit of doing something like the milestones definitions, which we talked about on the previous tab, is that at some point the publisher will be interested in sort of seeing a higher level roadmap of what this looks like. So after you have gone through sort of your milestone definitions, you might want to create sort of a roadmap. Again, this is just a format in which you can say, okay, for this project, it's a 14-month project for this example. Months 1 through 4 are for prototype. Months 5 and 6, we get it to an alpha. At the end of month 9, it's at a beta. And at the end of month 12, it is ready for submission or ready to be launched if you're making a PC game. And then, you oh wait, I outsmarted myself. So months 1 through 3 are the concept phase. Months 4 and 5, you're going to prototype the game. Months 6, 7, and 8, you're working on alpha, and beta is months 9, 10, 11, and then months 12 and 13. That's when you're bug fixing, and then it will be ready to release. So by then, you want to start thinking through the different areas. So the development team. So you're going to have your art team, your narrative team, your engineering team. You might want to, break this out by strike teams. So there's a concept of strike teams where if you have a large enough team, you can set sort of an artist, designer, and engineer or kind of set, you tell them, okay, here's this feature we want to implement. Can you go make this happen? And so they have all the resources within their team to create all the content, to do the code, and to lay it out in the game. And then that way they can kind of just work independently within sort of the larger game thing. So here you might say, this strike team's going to work on this feature, and you would start sort of loosely mapping out features by either team member or discipline or strike team. And then in each one of these buckets, you can kind of put a little note like, okay, month 1, we're going to focus on the game loop prototype. Month 2, if I had a row here for audio, I might put the audio group is going to add sounds to the prototype. And so at the end of this, and I don't have a finished version of it, which would be useful, you would have something filled out where you would have several rows of information that detail out what each person on the team was doing in a particular month. If you wanted to get super granular, you could even do this as a weekly sort of breakdown. Then you would also want to start thinking about the other things that are going to be needed to get the game launched. So there's all different types of testing that you would want to plan for depending on the scope and size and where your game's going to be launched. There's going to be localization. So again, you would say, like for the localization piece, okay, for the text, we need to finalize the text in month 7 so we can get it translated. So it gets translated in month 8. And then in month 9, we import the translations back into the game, and then we test. If you are working on multiple platforms, you probably would want to have some sort of roadmap that says, we're going to start the porting for the Xbox version here, and then we will submit the Xbox version to Microsoft for review on this date. And then this way, this gives you a nice bird's eye view of all those sort of the key dates and deadlines that you will have on your project. All right. Okay, so can you switch back to the slides, please? All right, so we talked about all of those things, the milestone overview, the definitions, and the roadmap. Next, we're going to talk about how to actually create a schedule. So you're like thinking, okay, Heather, yes, thank you for all of this information. This is very useful, but like I want an actual schedule. Like, how do I make that? So schedule estimates, can you go back to the spreadsheet now? Thank you. So here, again, it's another template to use for schedule estimates. As you start thinking through sort of what the different pieces of your game are, and if you have a team now, so you can see here I've kind of got in the rows, I have various sort of game areas that are broken down into key features. And then each one of these columns is a person that would do that work. So this team has a producer, a programmer, an artist, designer, a writer, an audio person, and a QA person. If you have a larger team or more specialized people, like I have an AI programmer, I have a networking programmer. For an artist, I have a concept artist. You could add columns for them. And, I've had a lot of people talk to me like, what's the best way to make a schedule? There's tons of different sort of schedule creation things out there. There's Microsoft Project, there's something called Monday.com, there's all different sorts of things. I would definitely encourage you to go explore those. I found that for sort of initial napkin math sort of things, I like this spreadsheet format because for me it's very simple and it behaves exactly in the way in which I want it to behave. I don't have to learn a new program. It doesn't have a lot of fancy things that I'm not entirely sure how to utilize as a feature. So that's just my 2 cents there. But as you think through, if you said, okay, we are going to have a feature in the game for quest one in the game, we'll call that feature one. The player is going to explore a forest area and they're going to be able to walk, run, and swim, and they need to collect items and they will need to get quests from somebody. So you could start sort of outlining here all the various actions that a player might need to have in the game. And then you start talking with sort of your programmer, artist, designers, all kind of get together and talk through what might this look like. The designer might have even a concept started, a design scope thing. And as you guys talk through this sort of in your prototype concept phase, you can start doing some napkin math estimates on, okay, I think it's going to take me this many hours, this many weeks, this many months. Each person would kind of put what, how many hours, whatever you wanted to use here, it might take them to do a thing. And you can quickly kind of run through this, take a couple hours one day. And over here, you could start just adding up sort of how much time it would take. The reason I suggest approaching it this way first is to gain an understanding of how much time do you estimate it's actually going to take, because your estimate's either going to be much larger than you thought it would take, or much less time than you thought it would take. Most of the time, people are shocked at, once they add up all of their estimates, that they're looking at a game that they thought they could make in 12 months. Looks like it actually would make a team of this size 3 years to do. So it's just a really good starting point to kind of understand the scope and what your team is capable of doing. And so you can do these schedule estimates. You can set up a spreadsheet to kind of, figure out hours, weeks, months. You can divide by the appropriate thing to say, okay, this is a 12-month project, X number Y, you know. Okay, so that's schedule estimates. Let me see if there's anything else on here. Oh, the other thing to keep in mind is estimates are exactly that, estimates. But you need to have some sort of baseline that you can work against so that you can see if you're ahead or behind on progress. So when you make your initial estimates and you're like, whoa, that's like going to take me 36 months. I feel really bad now and really demoralized. Well, go back and rethink your estimates. Are there things that you're like, okay, well, maybe it won't take me that long, or maybe we don't need this entire chunk of work? So what that does is it helps you realize, okay, I either have to descope what we want to do, add more people to the team, and it starts giving you tools to figure out what it is you need to do. So I would say never be afraid to make an estimate, even if you think this is completely wrong. The important thing is that it provides a starting point for you to measure progress against. All right, the next thing we're going to look at is sort of a resource overview. So one of the things that I like to do when I visualize projects is, on the prior tab, we came up with a schedule estimate for our little team here of a producer, a programmer, artist, designer. But we might not need the writer to start right away on the project. So in this example, we've got a 12-month sort of thing. And what a resource overview or a resource plan helps you better visualize, when do you need people to start and stop on a project? Because that is one way you can keep your game within budget, because you might say, I don't need a writer on the project for a full 12 months. I only need him or her for 3 months. And these are the 3 months in which that person will be needed. And the same with audio. Like we're not going to have any audio work that needs to be done before beta. So I'm going to have my audio person start in month 8. So as you're looking through the various things you need to do on the project, it will help you figure out how long do you need, the producer, the programmer, the artist. In this example, the programmer, artist, and designer start on the project at the beginning because they're all very involved in the concept phase and the prototype phase. But as you get to sort of midpoint of the project, you might say, well, the designers come in, they've designed everything that needs designed, they've set up the levels, they have things ready to go. We just need now to have the artists come in and, replace the placeholder assets. The programmer might still be, fixing bugs and doing localizations and other things. So we will let the designer roll off at this point in the project. That designer can go work on another project. And so this is a really nice way to kind of understand the ebb and flow of your team. All right. Next, we've got, I talked about iterative development. And now we're going to look at the schedule overview. Okay, so schedule overview, as you can see, like production and or project management and specifically is just honestly different ways to visualize information so that you can help refine your estimates and make sure that people are have clear definitions of what it is they're supposed to be doing and at when they're supposed to be doing it. So with this schedule overview, again, I've got my team on this side, and for this particular project, I've decided to use 3-week sprints, and then there's a week of testing time in between a sprint. A sprint is basically just a measurement of work, and there's a whole philosophy around agile development. I don't have time to get into it now. But basically, if you think about a sprint as at the beginning of the sprint, you say, here's a set of goals I want to get done for this game. At the end of the sprint, I want to have those goals finished and still have a playable version of the game. So a sprint is all about iterating in sort of 3-week increments where you continually add functionality to your game or add content, and then you spend some time testing it. And so in this example, taking all the information I've gathered before on the prior tabs with the schedule estimate, the resource overview, I could start getting a bit more granular with my planning and say, okay, within this 3-week period, here is a more detailed list of things that we need people to do. And, all of this work will be due on this date, and then we're going to test it together as a team. And then if you are somebody that uses Jira, things like that, I could talk for a long time about how you would structure this in different ways. But since this is really more of an overview, I won't go into all that detail. All right. Next, can you switch back to the slide view, please? Now we're going to talk a bit about budgets. Let's see how much time I've got. All right. Okay, so can you switch back to the slide view? All right. So on the screen, you will see an example budget. Again, caveat, this is for example purposes only. I purposely put everything as $1,000 because I didn't want people to get distracted by saying, oh, that's how much a designer is going to cost me for a month. None of these things are based on reality. I just picked 1,000 because it's easy to kind of talk through the examples with this. So how do you begin by making a budget? You've done planning prior, right? You've got your schedule, you have your concept, and you have sort of the scope of your game. You might have an understanding of who you have on the project. Okay, I have 3 people. As you start thinking through what that looks like, you need to start planning out sort of, and you've planned out sort of what work is needed for the game. You've talked through sort of your time estimates. You have an understanding of how many months you think you will need funding. You've kind of put together your resource plan that shows when you think people will roll on or off the project. And so those are sort of kind of your starting points. I've outlined this budget again to kind of mirror the 12-month project example I've been discussing throughout. And on here, you can see we have, a larger team than what I had in my planning prior, because the planning revealed that we actually needed 2 designers, 2 programmers, 3 artists, a sound designer, and a tester. And then down here, you kind of have, what I call management, community manager, producer, marketing manager. And of course, the list for this is going to look very different. I've done budgets for teams of 5, I've done budgets for teams of over 100 people. And so this list of sort of the people that you need is going to look very different on any project that you do. But it is useful to break your budget out into sort of the specific person, because salaries are always going to be the most expensive thing on your project. People are expensive, right? Um, when you're making your budget, you always want to pay yourself. So even if you're like, hey, I want to save money on this project, so I'm not going to pay myself, when you pitch to a publisher, you still want to include yourself as part of the budget. So, in order to have the most realistic budget, you need to make sure that the time you're spending on the project gets accounted for. Now, it's up to you whether you want to pay yourself that money or not, but for budgeting purposes, you should always include everybody in the budget, even if it's a group of 3 founders and you've all agreed we won't take salary. Your salary should be included in the budget. Um, when you look at some of these other expenses that you might have, like external contractors, you might want to have an accountant, you might want to get a lawyer. There's lots of different ways you can find, freelancers that would come in and work on a very targeted time frame on a set of specific things. So you might only need a lawyer for the first 4 months of your project, right? While you're negotiating publishing deals, while you're trying to set up your company's LLC or things like that. So, in addition to having sort of full-time salaried employees, you're going to have probably some external types of contractors, and then you might even have people that you outsource to. You might have an art studio that you're outsourcing to. You want to think through, what type of equipment are you going to be needing? That starts adding up. If you have a physical space, rent could be a big chunk of your monthly expenses as well. To rent, a space where 10 people could come and work probably would cost, several hundred or several $1,000s, depending on where you live and what rent is like. You're going to need computers and dev kits, and those aren't cheap. And you're going to need it for each person on the team. So each person on the team might need $3,000 to $5,000 worth of equipment. You're going to want to travel. So you've got to think through, okay, if I'm going to go to GDC, I need money in the budget for things like that. So the budget is really where you kind of start thinking through all the different things that are going to cost money, and you start listing them here. And, I've broken this out to kind of say, for example, it's only during these months that I would spend money on a thing. And so when you make the budget, you can kind of indicate, okay, this is a month where money gets spent on that thing. And so that's why some of these things don't have, you don't want to necessarily just average the cost of everything and then carry it across the um, whole thing. Because when you are trying to look at your budget and understand, you're going to get a understanding of, in month 1, I only needed $9,000 because I had so few people working on the team. But by the time I got to month 9, I needed $18,000 a month to sustain my studio because we added some contractors and we have a larger team now. So that's why I recommend sort of breaking it out and really indicating the specific amount a group gets paid in the month that they get paid. Let's see here. Whoops. What else do I have here? Yes. So as you've put your budget together, so let's kind of go through this a little bit. I have you I don't have it in this example, but one of the other reasons you kind of want to track your information like this is, let's say you get funding in month 5 and you're like, "Wow, this is great. I've got a milestone payment from the publisher, so that's going to carry us over for months 5, 6, 7, and 8." What you want to do is, when you're putting sort of your budget together, you need to make sure, is that milestone payment that you got in month 5 really going to support the studio for the next 3 months? So I'm going to do some terrible math here: 10, 20, 30, 40. So let's say we're looking at roughly $60,000 is needed to get us through months 5, 6, 7, and 8. We've run out of money. The publisher is going to give us a milestone payment, but it's only $50,000. So as you're negotiating with your publisher and you have your own detailed budget to look at, you might say to them, "Hey, actually, for that milestone payment, we would like to increase the payment in month 5 versus having a larger payment at the end, because that will be better for our cash flow purposes and things like that." And once you have made your budget, you want to actually track against it. So you've got your, 10 people working here. You've kind of outlined where they'll be, at what point in the project they're working, roughly how much they cost. You have accounted for all your other various expenses. And you have thought through sort of your outsourcing, like, okay, we are going to record voiceover. Yes, we need to pay for translations. Yes, we want to get rating for this game in, let's pick some country where they actually charge $1,000 for that. Um, and so now you have this thing to work from, and then you want to start tracking against your numbers. So as you go through month 1, 2, 3, and 4, you're going to want to say, this is how much I actually spent in month 1. And then you can go back and see how well were your budget predictions, and then you can use that data to iterate on your budget, make adjustments and improvements to it to get a budget that is more accurately reflects your cash flow and progress against it. Um, the other thing I would say is, if you are not um, money savvy, like, a lot of times I think people get daunted by budgets because it's a lot of numbers and it's money. And for people who don't necessarily spend a lot of time in spreadsheets and money, they may feel like, I don't really understand what's going on. I don't really enjoy this sort of stuff, so I'm just going to ignore it. I would say, even if you start your own company and you hire somebody who takes care of your budget for you, it is still useful to you to understand how the budget works and to know your numbers. Because at a minimum, when you're negotiating with a publisher or you're trying to negotiate with an outsourcer, for you to understand your budget and numbers is going to be super useful when you're trying to negotiate through those things. And there's lots of different programs out there that can help make tracking your budget a lot easier. You can use something like Quicken or You Need a Budget. There's also the FDIA offers. Oh, I have a link to it at the end. I'll talk about it in a minute. So there's a lot of different resources you can get that can help you become more comfortable with budgets and numbers. All right, can you switch back to the slides, please? So now I've kind of given you a very high level overview of budgets and schedules. Hopefully you've taken away a couple pieces of useful information. Um, I also have a book that I've written called The Game Production Toolbox that goes into budgets and schedules in a lot more detail, offers a lot of different examples. I also wanted to recommend, speaking of the, hey, how do I get better at being money smart or doing budgets? The federal government has what's called a Money Smart program. It's geared towards small businesses, but it's super useful and it's free and it has tons of resources on there. It has budget templates. It answers all different types of questions. And then, of course, indie game business, which I'm sure you guys should know about by now. We are a group that we want to teach developers about the business of making games. So we offer all types of free resources. We do a weekly podcast. We do virtual conferences. We have an active Discord, and there's lots of people in there that are more than happy to jump in, answer questions. It's a good way to meet other indie devs and other publishers. So, thank you so much for coming to my talk. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Yes, I can send Charlie, I can send you this deck and a version of this template so that you can send them out to the people who would be interested in them. Okay, so the question is, how are cuts to wished for features handled, like the decision to cut the metro before release? So when you are trying to descope your game, it is very important for you to understand at the core what are the pillars of your game and what's the most important thing you need. So when you um, are looking at a feature that you're like, I really would like to include this feature, first of all, you want to evaluate the time and effort that it takes. You also want to include testing time because all of those things kind of help you figure out it's going to take me X amount of time to make this feature. The benefit to the game is this. Okay, it's a huge benefit. This is something that will definitely level up the player's experience in the game. So it's worth putting this time and effort into it because it will benefit 100% of the players. It definitely holds to our core values. And so we want to include it. If you had a feature that you're like, I think some players would enjoy this feature. I think it's really cool. I really want to get it in. It's a pet feature. It's actually going to take 3 months to get in, but I think it's worth it. Then you want to look at, okay, well, how many players are likely to engage with this feature? So, for example, you might have a game where you have various different, you might have a ship or something, and maybe you want to be able to name, create a custom name for your ship. But for some reason, the way you have your game set up, it's going to take 2 months to put this feature in. So you have to ask yourself, even though this feature is really cool, is it worth the 2 months of effort to put in there? Is it going to benefit the players? Does it adhere to our core pillars of the game? If you had a core pillar that was like, our game is highly customizable, that actually makes the argument stronger that you should include that. If the core pillar of the game is on our ships, you can customize sort of the look of your ship. You might say, okay, naming your ship would be cool, but because we already have all these other customizable aspects of the ship, not worth the time and effort. That time is better spent elsewhere. Because you really want to kind of do what's a cost benefit analysis to figure out should we cut this feature? Should we include this feature that we think is really cool? The other thing that you can do for features that you would like to add is you just, if you launch a version of the game, you can include it in an update. You can say we've launched the game with sort of the basic version. We want to see how well players respond to it. Let's see what sort of feedback they give us, and then let's prepare an update. And we're going to include this feature because we think it's cool. And then also, we've been getting feedback from players that they would like to see this too. Oh, I wish I had marketing's milestones in the roadmap for my current game. How do you? Yes, okay. Marketing is a whole other thing to plan for, and that's a great question. What I like to do is if you could switch back to the spreadsheet view here, I think on my roadmap, is it this one? On the roadmap overview, um, what I like to do is I do sort of a roadmap view of marketing, and then I put all of the sort of the key marketing things. They're going to need trailers. They're going to need screenshots. They're going to need blog posts and things like that. And I put it on my main roadmap. And then what I try to do is kind of match it up to what phase the game is going to be in at that time so that I can be more specific with marketing about what type of content I can provide for them for game trailers or screenshots and what stuff that they would have to to wait for. So really, if you have a marketing partner that you're working with, they should be you should go work with them directly to kind of say, look, I want to lay out a roadmap of when you want things and what you're going to need because I need to reconcile it with our development roadmap so that I can give you a more accurate picture of when you will actually be able to get these things. Is it common for solo indies to find a PM consultant for periodic check-ins and advisory, like a paid mentor? I guess it really kind of depends. I actually have. Oh, okay, for example, I saw a recent successful Kickstarter that advertised porting to all consoles. I have no idea where to start to advertise my game. Okay. Yeah, so I would say that's actually one of the things that indie game business helps developers do. We have sort of that the Powell Group helps. So if you're an indie developer and you're like, hey, I need some help and understanding of what these things are, first I would say check out the Indie Game Business YouTube channel just for some basic information. But if you're like, no, I sort of need a next level, like a mentor, yeah, that is something that the Powell Group could help with. I know that I have worked with independent developers where I meet with them like an hour every other week and kind of go through different things. And it certainly can be super valuable just to kind of get the lay of the land and some more specific information. Um, and you can solve your problems faster that way. Okay. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed chatting at the screen with you. Hopefully, you all enjoyed it. And if you have any other questions afterwards, feel free to, I guess, let Charlie know, and she can get those to me, and I will send her the deck and the template.